Today on the Autism Channel World News, a new study uses baby teeth to investigate if household products contribute to autism. Americans with disabilities are striving to work. Probiotics may reduce social anxiety, and an in-depth look at the hit comic book series that is teaching facial cues. Plus, an autistic man in a tiny Canadian town completes his bucket list with something completely unexpected. I'm Nancy Quinones with Tim Yancey, Carl Nubiel, and Francisco Urena, and this is the Autism Channel World News for Saturday, June 13th, 2015. The long-standing debate whether autism is genetic, environmental, somewhere in between, or something else entirely is the focus of a new study funded by a celebrity. Our Tim Yancey has the story.
Actress Jessica Alba has created a huge success with the Honest Company. The Honest Company came out of her battle in the United States to get the 1976 Toxic Substances Control Act repealed. That act allows 80,000 chemicals to remain in our household products untested. Now, 3 years after she founded it, the Honest Company offers 120 products and is funding autism research with New York's Mount Sinai Hospital. That study does some of the testing she hoped would have been mandated if the Toxic Substances Control Act had been repealed. Dr. Philip Landrigan at Mount Sinai will be looking for an autism link to household chemicals by comparing the baby teeth of neurotypical children to those of children diagnosed with autism. Baby teeth hold a record of what chemicals children were exposed to over their growth, and with enough baby teeth tied to data on autism diagnoses of the children who grew them, Dr. Landrigan hopes to find a possible connection. So those teeth the tooth fairy used to exchange for money may turn out to be quite valuable after all.
25 years have passed since the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted, and that is causing a lot of reflection on what that legislation has done and hasn't done. One example is a telephone study conducted by the Kessler Foundation. The foundation interviewed 3,000 people with disabilities and found that 6% had never worked. Nearly 43% were currently working, 9% were looking for work, and 17% had worked since they became disabled. Kessler says the disabled people in their study who are currently employed work an average of 35.5 hours per week. More than half work over 40 hours a week, and more than 40% say they want to work more. The conclusion of the study: more than 2/3 of Americans with disabilities are striving to work. Carl Nubiel joins us with a story about what may be a very strange connection: social anxiety and fermented foods.
Specifically, we're talking about fermented foods that contain probiotics, which are special types of bacteria such as lactobacillus in yogurt. The study was conducted by the University of Baltimore using researchers from the College of William and Mary and asked 700 students about their diet in great detail, including how much fermented food they ate and how much fruit and vegetables, to establish a baseline for healthy eating habits. They discovered that students who ate more fermented food with probiotics reported less social anxiety. And this amazed the researchers because it added proof to the controversial theory that much of what takes place in the brain originates in the gut. The researchers also confirmed that exercise reduces social anxiety and that the higher the level of neuroticism in the subject, the more effective the fermented probiotics were in anxiety reduction. The next step is an experimental version of the study, which can ascertain if there is direct causation. And if there is, the next step looks at the data to try and see if a correlation exists between fermented food intake and autism symptoms.
Stephen Hawking is a famous British mathematical physicist who developed a theory of the nature of time. He was portrayed in the 2014 film The Theory of Everything, which was nominated for 5 Academy Awards and won in the Best Actor category. Recently, Dr. Hawking addressed a gathering at Cambridge honoring his 50th year as a university fellow. He praised them for all the special accommodations the school provided him as he wrote groundbreaking books like A Short History of Time. But he questioned whether the world today would not be as accepting of someone with his disability.
I wonder whether a young, ambitious academic with my kind of severe condition now would find the same generosity and support in much of higher education. Even with the best goodwill, would the money still be there? I fear not.
When we return, Francisco Urena will join us with a look at a comic book series with an on-the-spectrum superhero. Stay with us, we'll be right back. This is the Autism Channel World News. I'm Nancy Quinones.
I'm Daniel Heinlein, and this is the world of autism in one place, the Autism Channel.
You don't have to wait to vote, at least not for the Autism Channel. Just go to the address on your screen. Then you'll see this form. Make sure you check channel, series, or show. The next form will ask you to fill in the name of who you're submitting, the Autism Channel, then your first name, your last name, and your email address. That's it. Do the math and click Submit, and you're done. The Autism Channel. We need your vote.
Francisco Urena covers media and social media, and this week he's been reading comic books. Not just any comic books. Francisco?
If you follow what's new in autism, you might already know about Face Value Comics. You may also know that it's a comic book series that features a main character superhero who is himself on the autism spectrum. That character, Michael, is the first autistic hero to be featured in his own comic book series. You may have seen the piece NBC Nightly News did on the comics creator. One of the prime goals was to use the exaggerated comic art to teach the meanings of facial expressions. You may not know the tremendous impact this idea has had on the world of comic books, or that it has launched a new way we're teaching the understandings of facial expressions. When NBC's Hallie Jackson reported on the first issue of the comics back in September of last year, she started her piece through the eyes of an on-the-spectrum comic book fan looking at their first issue.
In his mind, he's like thinking in the little thought bubble, will they think less of me because I have autism?
Do you ever think the stuff that Michael thinks?
Sometimes I do. I think, do I act weird? Do I talk different than everybody else?
People with autism.
There are now 3 issues with more on the way. And the creator, Dave Cott, joins us to talk about how fast this success has all happened.
It has been a whirlwind. Initially, everything started off with a phone call into the York Dispatch. I wanted to make a press release. I had collected, like I said, I'm a longtime comic book fan and have collected lots of comics, but nowhere really has anyone synthesized or made available, more readily available, how to do your own comic books. We know that there are the big guys like Marvel and DC that publish Spider-Man and Batman and those titles of the comic book genre. But for an independent artist, an independent creator, well, it was kind of difficult. So I just called into the newspaper and said, I'd like to do a press release. And I had to leave a voicemail message. Within a half an hour, I got a phone call back asking to do an interview about this because of its social impact. And from there, the ball really just kind of snowballed quite large. We got an invitation to partner with Diamond Comic Distributors to take our book international. And we sat on that email for a week because I thought it was spam. I thought in no way would Diamond Comics be looking to contact little old us. I understand their location comparable to us is only maybe an hour or two away, so they may have picked up some of the news feed and local buzz. But for an entity that size, with that level of prestige and influence in the comics genre, to reach out to us was nuts, I think, but not the kind to which I'm allergic. So that was a great opportunity. We had an interview with our local ABC 27 News channel, and that interview actually won Steve Fisher, the interviewer, a journalistic Emmy. So I have no idea how a comic book helps an individual get a journalistic Emmy. But that was another part of the process. We've had people come from out of state to do interviews. We've had interviews internationally, Australia, India, Spain, Portugal, Italy. These are now, I'm seeing the world of autism and advocacy in a much different perspective. I now kind of have a global view on it and can contact a lot of good, a lot of good friends in and across the world and ask them for advice, ask them for best practices, or just to bounce an idea off of a new idea that we may have for the comic books or in advocacy in general. And to have that kind of solidarity, that kind of, for lack of better words, fraternity from like-minded individuals who are autistic and who are neurotypical, but have a deep appreciation and understanding of wanting to do something more with autism. Just being able to reach and talk to somebody in Sweden, I can't tell you how reassuring that is. It makes me feel less alone. It makes me feel like the work that we're doing is valued, not just locally. Initially, when we started off, I thought we might make 100 copies to our local comic book store, not become one of the best-selling independent comic books of all time. That still is kind of an odd badge for me to wear or recognize. To have made a nice dent or impression in the marketplace would have been nice. Initially, we would have been considered a success if we sold between 900 and 1,100 comic books. We sold 11,000 copies of issue 1 alone, and it just keeps going. We've had to adjust some of our marketing strategies because we came to realize, and only I think perhaps in hindsight did we recognize this, is that the longevity of the comic book deserves to be longer than a shelf life in a comic book store. By comparison, if the writers who did Spider-Man, the guy who was bitten by, let's face it, a radioactive spider, developed cancer, and they wrote his character with compassion and clinical accuracy, in so much that Spider-Man would have to choose between going on a date, finishing his midterm, or fighting Dr. Doom and getting his chemotherapy treatment. If we could have that, how long would that stand on the shelves? Well, pretty much anybody that would be diagnosed with cancer and who is a Spider-Man fan would want that. Not everybody who would be diagnosed with cancer currently is diagnosed with cancer. So if it happens next month or 6 months from now, how would you find that Spider-Man comic? So we made the choice to have the comics available through print on demand or digital download in perpetuity, just keep it going, because we have new fans, younger fans, diagnosed or coming to understand their diagnosis every day. And given the amount of publicity that we've had, we get bounced around in small circles amongst the family members and in the community, and somebody says, "Did you hear about this comic book?" to a new family. And invariably they reach out to us and ask for ways and how to buy it. I guess I was kind of floored when a few weeks after the NBC Nightly News piece aired, we saw that the comic books were going for through third-party resellers. This was second prints, unsigned copies. One went on eBay for $150 when we sell it for $5. That was the moment I realized that we were onto something that had more value, more importance than even I had given, a loving creation.
We will continue our discussion with Dave Cott and talk about new characters and new social issues that Face Value Comics will address in future issues next week on the next edition of the Autism Channel World News.
Finally, from Kamloops, British Columbia, comes the story of a 67-year-old Patrick O'Neill. Mr. O'Neill is blind since birth and autistic. Last week, he completed the final entry of a bucket list that he began 3 years ago. Mr. O'Neill took the controls of a Cessna 172 out of the Tyler Aviation Flight School, with an instructor there to help, of course. He got the idea of a bucket list from a couple he lives with in a home sharing program for people with developmental disabilities. The walls of his room are covered with pictures so he can show others all the things he's done, like riding in a helicopter and riding his tandem bike with his best friend, who also went flying with him. Thanks to the Medicine Hat News and Medicine Hat, Alberta, for telling us about Patrick O'Neill. That's the Autism Channel World News for Saturday. For our news team and everyone at the Autism Channel, join us again as we continue to unlock the wonders of autism. See you next time. I'm Nancy Quinones.
You can look into their eyes and see how much you mean to them. People with autism don't have to say it. This is the Autism Channel.